Hey, it's Darcy McConvey, and this is the Venture and Gains podcast. The purpose of the show is to connect people to other great people, ideas, and opportunities. Everyone has less than a handful of people in their network where it seems like there's something different about them. Everything they touch seems to turn to gold. These are the podcast guests. We catch them at various stages of their career, learn from how they think, so we can connect the dots and apply it. In this episode, we dive into the psychedelic space with David Nikzad, the founder and chairman of EI Ventures, where he lays down the groundwork for the therapeutic use of botanical psychedelics. Maybe the answer is as simple as go back to the land, go back to the plants. We discuss synthetic versus natural compounds in psychedelics. David's main objective is to create the new standard of pharma, food as medicine, using products that come from the earth in whole plant form. We round out the conversation with trying to better understand how people can participate in the growing psychedelic space, how to invest, and where to start. Ultimately, EI Ventures stands for Emotional Intelligence Ventures. And for David, this psychedelic journey is about establishing empathy for others. As he puts it, viewing people out of other people's lenses. I've learned a lot in this conversation, and I hope the same for you. Enjoy. Welcome back to season 2 for the Venture and Gains podcast. Today we're, as always, I think we all open podcasts saying excited for our guest, and this one is certainly no different. I'm very excited to welcome David Nikzad. So David, I'll let you jump into maybe some of the background, but when you research some of your background, your company's background, what you're trying to do, one of the things that you highlight, and I think it's become more mainstream media, is around this psychedelic revolution that's happening. So, one of the terms that I think you threw out there is kind of creating a legacy of mental health and wellness for future generations starting right now. So, it's something that I'm slowly learning about and have been over the last year. So why don't you, tell me a little bit more about what you're trying to do and where you're coming from?
I mean, I think it's great because it's a good headway into this call. We just got off the phone with a fund out of Canada, and, realizing what our one desire is, it's not only about, psychoactive materials or non-psychoactives. It's about creating the new standard of pharma. And we've learned, especially in the last year, watching almost 300 companies go public, we want to be the orange juice. We want to be the company that is the botanical company in the space. We look at many of our competitors as the screwdriver. And I think it's almost perfect that we have a single desire and focus to be the new standard of pharma with an F. And, when we think about it, we don't think about, we look at money as a frequency of energy, and we look at what we're doing as, $100 billion plus company that will have critical mass impact on the global population.
And so when you compare screwdriver versus orange juice, you're saying screwdriver is somehow altered versus orange juice is natural? Is that the comparison?
Well, I mean, you got to remember something. So 99% of the companies working in the psychedelic space or even in the nutraceutical space are working with some type of a synthetic material or some type of an isolate. And the reason a lot of clinical studies are done like that is because it's easy to take a compound off the shelf or a molecule that already has clinical data available around it. So what we're doing, which seems so kind of strange, is we're using products that come from earth that are in whole plant form. And I think a lot of people don't understand that even when you go to the grocery store, 99% of the products in the grocery store are some way processed or synthetic. And it's, very much like that when you go to a GNC or a vitamin store. You're not getting, you think you may be buying coconut water, but you're getting some type of isolate powder that has water added to it.
And so you're saying it's all natural. Like when I read about, kind of maybe it's your 3 pillars, or, you've got mental health, medical issues, and other problems can potentially be saved by psychedelic medicine, where your mission is to give people access to what you just called as pharma, which is food as medicine. And then the future, which is pharmaceutical, literally,
where, you believe that sort of these natural compounds or natural food effectively will be able to sort of change how we live. And it's interesting because I read about sort of, follow Tim Ferriss a little bit, read about sort of what Rick Doblin sort of had to say. And one of his things is psychedelics, when widely used, have the potential to heal us, help inspire us, and even save us. So where do you fall in there? Are you trying to tackle all of these things with what you're doing?
Yeah, we are. I mean, what we're trying to do specifically, we have a product called Silly, which we believe that people can take to solve multiple different, I don't want to call them impediments or, whatever somebody is dealing with. We're all dealing with something. And we've been able to take a number of whole plant products and combine them into this product that you can take in a very low dosage. Yes, it has psilocybin in it, which is the active ingredient in magic mushrooms, but it's the idea of giving somebody a whole plant product that they can take and effectively fix or rewire whatever they're dealing with, and then be able to have, like tools in a toolbox, many other products that they can go to deal with everyday life. You have to remember, EI Ventures has many psychoactive materials in its library. But as many psychoactive materials as we have nutraceuticals that are daily drivers for people that they can use to deal with whatever implication they need. We are working on things to deal with sexual intimacy. We're doing things to deal with, better versions of, let's say, Adderall or a 5-hour energy shot. We know that, people, there's no magic pill out there, but how about giving yourself something that comes from earth that's actually all natural? I think the comical part of it is most things that say they're all natural are usually aren't.
When you talk about dealing with issues, like what is the compound or what is psilocybin, or maybe we can, and after this, maybe we'll jump into what exactly is psilocybin and what are the compounds, but what is psilocybin doing to help me deal with whatever that issue is? And is that, maybe let's start there.
The active ingredient in magic mushrooms, and there's probably a few hundred magic mushrooms or different spore variations, they have an active ingredient called psilocybin. When psilocybin hits the bloodstream, it turns into psilocin. What we have done through our own spore library is we have identified 6 specific spores that have high dosages of psilocybin, and we are able to extract psilocin out of those mushrooms and combine them with other botanicals to be able to create a better version of your, eating a bag of mushrooms. You got to remember, our product is taken in 1 milligram dissolvable tablets. So when you think about people taking magic mushrooms, usually they're talking about taking 1 gram or 3.5 grams. We're talking about 1 gram is 1,000 milligrams. We're talking about 1 milligram. So something where we have used technology to extract this specific alkaloid where people don't feel nausea, they don't feel like they're going to have a stomach issue. It's the cleanest version of taking magic mushrooms.
And so the way you envision it is it's clean, but is it going to be for recreational use, or is it part of something greater that is more, psychedelics in combination with like psychotherapy?
Yeah, I mean, in my big vision or in my thought, when I've journaled about this silly product for almost 10 years, and everything that's always come to me is some type of way of leveraging technology, maybe through some type of a telehealth app, where, if you're going to give this product to 1 billion people in a therapeutic model, you're going to have to make it accessible and also scalable. So a lot of times what I've thought about is almost like a $20 therapy session where silly almost becomes subsidized. And now somebody's able to take 30 minutes with somebody, maybe 15 minutes, go through what they need to go through. This 1 milligram product takes them through like a 30-minute entourage effect. And right afterwards, they're ready to go back to work or be able to drive. So for me, when I look at, the so many hundred other companies, somebody taking a tab of LSD or going on this big escalated journey, that's not really real to me.
Yeah, it's less practical. The scalability component at least goes away.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've taken silly from the 1 milligram dose up to the 100 milligram dose. So I understand, what those different iterations are going to do to people, and they're all going to do something different. So why not start small and escalate as needed? And, through clinical studies and data, we will develop protocols for whatever, specific issues somebody's dealing with.
And when you think about distribution in that sort of, reach 1 billion people, even doing it via telehealth or telemedicine, it's definitely more accessible and more scalable, but you also are going to need, the people, it sounds like, to administer. So is that part of the plan, or is it more like plug into sort of already existing distribution and trained staff that's already there somewhere?
Yeah, that's absolutely. I think it's a hybrid effect. I don't think, if I were to give you a crystal ball and say I knew exactly, the way this was going to turn out today of where Silly is, this ball is rolling down a hill and it's moving faster than you can imagine. I mean, in my mind, I see Silly being used in the prison systems. I see it being used with terminally ill patients. I see it as a plug and play API into distribution networks, as we talked about, like the one that you're involved with. So how do we leverage the existing models into distribution? Getting to 1 billion people is not simple, but it's very doable.
And so I feel like that is sometimes when you think about, some of these emerging psychedelic or, even I guess cannabis, it's the, like, how do you administer, and the distribution is kind of not overly well thought out at times. They think it's going to be just plug into telemed, but there's much more than that. So if we think about your, the products, I read that I think you guys are maybe in the throes of, or soon to be in the throes of, sort of raising capital. And I was listening to a video that you did, proprietary solutions. So a library of nano supermolecules, psychedelic APIs. Sounds futuristic, and it sounds very much technology driven. What does that even mean?
What does that mean? So we have 3 main compounds in the psychoactive market that we're working with. One being Silly, which at the base level is an extraction of psilocin. We have an MDMA molecule, and we have a molecule of DMT. So what our vision is to take these products that we have created botanical analogs of and be able to license them and partner them with specific people and organizations that want to work on specific treatments for these molecules. So I would say, thinking about that statement, we've created this active pharmaceutical ingredient that can be administered in a 1 milligram dose. How do we go out and take that 1 milligram dose and customize it to a specific treatment? Let's take something very simple that a lot of people are working on, PTSD. How do we take that active pharmaceutical ingredient and develop something that is specifically for PTSD? I would think probably one of our best, partners that we could have would be the U.S. military. To be totally, when I've actually sat down, gone through our library of molecules and listed out who potential partners are. I've lived in Hawaii for more than a decade, and I would probably say on the daily, I meet multiple people in the military that are dealing with PTSD. And I would say that's pretty on a global level, I would say a lot of people in the military are dealing with that, especially coming from war or being in some type of a conflictual situation.
And I think there's pretty recent, or maybe research even that dates back to 50s or 60s around PTSD and the impact that psychedelic treatment has had on PTSD. Like that's one of the big things I think that sort of has broke it open, is just the realization around trauma and the impact trauma has had, and then the healing effect that psychedelics have had on things like PTSD. So it makes sense that that's a place you start. I would also imagine that a lot of first of all, I can't believe that there's been 300 companies go public, but a lot of them are probably going at the same sort of similar thing.
Totally.
How does big pharma feel about it?
I talk to people in big pharma. I talk to a lot of, I would say law firms that have big pharma executives that are now, acting as I would call FDA lawyers. I think it's comical for them. I think that most people that really have FDA background that are looking at, what the checkbook size is for, a Pfizer or an Abbott, or, they're thinking to themselves that when it's appropriate, those companies will enter the market. I do think what's beautiful about today, and, we're probably going to go into a lot of different tangents. You have this company, Tesla. You have Porsche, Mercedes, you have all these other big companies. And then you have a platform like Robinhood that is all of a sudden taking some really smart kid in MIT that has figured out how to create his own family office in his dorm. And that's what you're seeing today in the psychedelic space, is that you can have all of these Robinhood traders, almost like social media, support a company where a company can disrupt these multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical companies. So it's twofold. I think the pharmaceutical companies are definitely, they're looking at it and taking it much more seriously. But I do think there's an element of them thinking that, can these people really pull this off? And, just getting off some of the calls that I've been on today in meetings, you got 288 companies that have gone public. I'm going to bet, because we've analyzed almost all of them, probably out of those 288, there's going to be less than 24 that actually survive and become companies that actually do something. Maybe even less than that, maybe a dozen. So I think it's twofold. I think that you're going to need a critical mass of companies, and it's unfortunate because sometimes the right companies don't get funded, but it's almost like the food chain, it's a necessary evil as much as I don't like it.
What's the drive to go public? Like, it seems so early for so many of these firms versus, the trend in tech has the other way. Has been, which is stay private longer.
Absolutely. I mean, I can look back at, 18 months ago when somebody came to me and said, well, let's take Orthogonal public, which is the parent company of EI. And I was like, I'm like, listen, we're not going public for, another 10 years. We got to grow our company to a certain point. We're in a different market. I think, number one, biotech is something that has to be consistently funded. And that's just how it goes. And I think that investing has also reached a different inflection point. And I think as a investor, my bedrock is an investor. That's where I came from. And the idea of liquidity today, especially with SPVs and, secondary markets, there's a lot of ways to move money around and have liquidity. So now all of a sudden, most, what I would say, companies that are coming out and funding, especially something as risky as psychedelics, they need to see this liquidity model, especially when, you're loading a pipe. And, I don't know if people understand what that means, but they need to have an upside to their investment, whether that investment is going to last a year, 2 years, it has a lockup. So, the landscape is definitely changing. And maybe it's a good thing. It's definitely, for me, coming to this as a technology investor, I've had to now go from riding a bicycle to riding a scooter. It's different.
So, it's interesting. Like, you hear about the research, and we can jump back. We're going to jump back into investing and maybe just the process of going public and sort of the trajectory. But like, I'll be honest, even up until last year, the trigger for me on psychedelics was very mainstream, which is Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind. And previous to that, when I would hear about psychedelics, I guess it's a little bit judgmental, not because I didn't know, and that was just my belief in a way. Like, when you think about LSD, or you think about this very extreme narcotic, and the more I read about it, and it's becoming clear, there's so many great use cases, and it's not as, or doesn't have to be as harsh as what, the picture that has been painted. So what do you tell people that would be coming from a view similar to what I would have had, or, even I'm sure my parents or people that I associate, you tell them about like magic mushrooms and they're just like, oh, really? Or LSD. Like, what do you tell people when that stigma is so deeply burned into their beliefs?
I know we're in a different phase of reality. I mean, did any of us think that we would be wearing a mask everywhere we go? I would say that habit loops are hard to break, but when people are in fear or desperation, somebody said something to me that I really found valuable as I was going down the journey of, getting to know these medicines. On your dying day, you will do anything for another day. You'll give up anything. And I think that at a whole, as I've traveled the country and I've been out of the country, we're in a place where people are at their dying day with where they're at right now with COVID. So right now, the idea of creating something that could have hope, and that's why we really look at this as the new standard of pharma and not just psychedelics, people are a lot more open to it. So as much as I think COVID is the worst thing that could have happened, it might actually be the best thing that ever happened, because people are more open than they ever have been.
From the little bit of research that I've done and sort of, the early exploration, the research on psychedelics, actually the quite compelling research, seems to date back to the 50s. And I don't know all the cast of characters. I've heard their names, but couldn't recite them.
I mean, I think it goes back even further than that. I mean, a lot of people, what's interesting in the formulations that we put together, we use products that are mentioned in the Bible and the Old Testament. When you think about myrrh, rye, frankincense, these are all psychoactive compounds that, don't take this the wrong way, and my parents might get upset with me, but these are products probably Moses took. When I really look at the transcriptions of psychedelics and what they were doing for people, I think it dates back a long time before just the 50s. Do I think that science in the early 20s and 30s caught on to this element of creating these, what I would call analog synthetic molecules that replicate plant material? Absolutely. But that was what I would say starting point of pharmaceutical companies. It was an idea of taking, let's look at the opium plant, creating this analog version of it, a version of it that is synthetic, and then being able to create, morphine. That's where all these products really come from. They come from a master class of botanicals, but what ends up happening is that the things we put in them or the way we process them with other materials is what makes them harmful. And I think we're just at a stage now where it's funny. Now everybody wants to, we're all about drinking juice and we're all about, eating our salads and being healthy. Maybe the answer was we just got to go back to the land. We have to go back to the plants. Sometimes the answers are as simple as that.
Yeah, well, I think there's even therapies like, outdoor nature walks and the endless list of them where it just makes you feel better and clears your mind and cleans your mind. You know, I would think that maybe even, I don't know how much you want to go into the history of it, but I guess one of the reasons, if I go back to kind of a question or two ago around the stigma that's sort of burnt into a lot of people's beliefs, is the fact that it's not legal, right? And it became sort of this counterculture thing, and then backlash. Then literally like the, government stepped in and classified it as whatever they classified it as. So I think maybe if that, veil comes off, the legal veil, obviously, then it becomes much more freeing to at least explore for a lot of people, I'm guessing.
You hope it will. I mean, again, it's everybody has their own story. I mean, not long ago, alcohol was illegal. In the last 100 years, now you go to a supermarket and if you drink enough of any of it, it will kill you. The element of legal and not legal, I think that's part of it. But I think with anything else, even like with cannabis, we're in a new era. I don't know how old you are, but I definitely at 44 years old, I see something going on, and I call it my spidey sense. But I think with crypto, this idea of Bitcoin today and, just talking to normal people, there's an element that people want freedom of choice, freedom of the mind, freedom of use of products. And I think that there was an element of, a lot of my friends talked to me about the Illuminati and, how currency was developed and who's in control. There's an element of just freedom of choice of what you put in your body and mind. And I think that, everything has we always say everything has a frequency of energy. I almost would say, not to get too kind of spiritual, maybe this was already written. Maybe this was part of the destiny. And as strange as that sounds, there's many people that I talk to that are far from what you expect. I mean, I talked to a guy yesterday in Miami that's a Cuban immigrant that got here when he was 5 years old, working on the boat docks, talking to me about psychedelics and, possibly how that would help one of his family members. So we're in a different mindset.
No question. And look, I think the spiritual nature is in some ways what it's all about, like this connectedness, this sort of universal consciousness. So to go to a spiritual place is probably where you need to go to connect people with it in a way.
You realize that Facebook is less than 20 years old as a company that is connecting more than 1 billion people. So the idea of shifting a habit loop and giving something that could ultimately change the way people operate at a conscious level or act at a humanitarian level, it's actually very doable today.
Yeah, that's a good point. So on the legal front, I guess as it pertains to the US, where are we in terms of it being legal? And if so, what elements of treatment or consumption are legal?
In today's US market, if you are selling or partaking in these substances first of all, if in the selling or commercialization of these products, you're going to go to jail. It's completely against the law, and at a federal level, it violates Schedule 1. I think a lot of people get confused by the idea of decriminalization, and I think this is where people have to really go back to cannabis and just realize, listen, cannabis today is still a Schedule 1 product, and technically the DEA could come into any state and shut it down. I think what a lot of people are sort of navigating with is this idea of, okay, we missed the window of making a lot of money in cannabis and we were kind of scared to get involved with that. Now we can get into this. And I think that, number one, yes, it's completely illegal, but I think that the world is changing, specifically the United States. And I do believe at a state level, what Oregon has done, which Colorado did for cannabis, we have now laid down what I would call the groundwork of states opening up where therapeutic access to botanical psychedelics will open in the future. Not there yet, but we are close.
Just for our understanding, what did Oregon do? And like, what's the process to decriminalization versus making it full legal? Like, maybe clarify that.
Yeah, the process of decriminalization it's not simple, but it's a lot simpler than going and actually passing an initiative that says psychedelic drugs will be legal at a state level through some type of therapeutic model. So a state initiative of decriminalization and getting a vote passed. So, okay, you can take, let's say, fungal matter, magic mushrooms, and not get in trouble. It's almost like a walking contradiction, because the person selling you those or the person growing them can go to jail, but you can consume them because it's decriminalized. So for me, decriminalization is something huge. You know, one of my very good friends and advisors is Kevin Matthews, which, you know, basically spearheaded Denver, which then took off to, 20 other different states. That's one level of it. But what I want to see is a state initiative, as Oregon is doing, where there will actually be a model of producing these products, having regulatory, it's going to take a while. I mean, Colorado, so many years later, and many other states do not have cannabis perfect. So again, when I think about it, and a lot of people don't like my answer, I'm getting ready for a 10-year stretch of how access and how these therapeutic models will be built. I don't think it's going to happen overnight.
By the way, back on alcohol, I think that in 100 years, we'll look back on alcohol, and this is an out there thought, and just think, what were we thinking in terms of how much we consumed of it? And as these things evolve and become more legal, and, I think you just have you become more in touch with lifestyle, the earth, people, each other. And we're going to realize that, like, instead of numbing, maybe we should tune in a little more.
I've gotten sort of a bad rap because I'm very against disassociatives. And again, if we wanted to produce botanical disassociatives, we definitely could do that. But alcohol is a disassociative. It's a numbing product. And I think that the psychedelic market, companies going to market with disassociative so-called psychedelics, we're just creating another version of alcohol. I would probably tell you today, we're talking about 100 years. I talk to a lot of people that wonder why alcohol is legal today. And, again, we talk about this thing of like even drinking and driving. And, I'm here in Miami and I see people having 5 drinks and then getting behind the wheel of a car. The fact that laws are not in place to, permanently take people's driver's license, if not put them in jail, is kind of crazy to me. So I think what it goes back to is the idea of how strong the capitalistic structure is. Alcohol is a $1 trillion plus a year market. And, I always go back to this with people get upset about is we've made the monetization of humans we've made it okay because it's a way people make money, and that's okay if people die. For me, that's not okay, not even if it's one person. And I will tell you, a lot more people die from alcohol than that.
Yeah, for sure. So what's an example just on that? Is there any natural psychedelics that are disassociative?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the one that, everybody is now, the big thing is ketamine. I just had a meeting today with a gentleman that, has had an incredible life in the hedge fund financial world, but is dealing with some PTSD and, has realized that ketamine is this habit loop that doesn't stop. It's an element of something that numbs you out, and you feel better for a day or during that time frame, and then you go right back to that low. And disassociatives in general, if you talk to most people that drink alcohol, they're going to tell you that they feel depressed afterwards. So disassociatives, even through much data, I always like to go back to data, disassociatives empirically create depression. Why would we create more disassociatives? So I think a big one is ketamine. I think many of these, what I would call analog synthetic compounds that are being produced, we really don't know what they do to us. You can market anything that has no real data and say it's going to be the next breakthrough medicine. But I mean, if you look at products today that have been in the market like Adderall and Lexapro and many other, what I would call ADD and autistic medicines, I can tell you there's not a day that goes by that I don't get somebody contacting me that, Adderall has led them into other things in their life that hasn't been good for them. So ultimately, you won't know the side effects for a very long time.
Just out of curiosity, like where does the ketamine naturally occur? What's the source of ketamine?
Ketamine, I believe, comes from the opium plant. It originally came from, I think the bedrock of ketamine came from PCP, and PCP was derived from the opium plant, which is where morphine came from. So again, used for the proper purposes, like I see ketamine being used for end-of-life treatments. Specifically, I've seen it in Hawaii with, certain shamans and other people that I've met that don't want to use morphine. But again, it is at the 1% level of the 99% that it's being touted for. Ketamine is a fully synthetic product. There is nothing natural about it. I think the other part of it is a lot of people are not taking into account the liver damage and, what it does to the nervous system to constantly be taking a ketamine treatment. It's not something that's meant to be taken all the time. We talk to a lot of people today that tell me that they go to ketamine treatment almost 3 times a week.
Wow. In some ways, it's the natural occurring versus non, although I know there's a lot of natural things that wouldn't be great to ingest. But anyways, that's maybe for another time. So what's the status of your business today? I think you're saying, obviously, that you're going public and doing it in Canada. Is this the case?
We are going down the road of a public offering in Canada. Can't really get into too much of the details just because we have certain filings that we're doing in the US right now. But yes, we have partnered with the Neo Exchange for a public offering in the future for EI Ventures.
On a more personal level, I know you want to grow a huge company and impact a ton of people and have people invest alongside you in the solution. Do you ever wrestle with reconciling making a ton of money over sort of natural substances and growing a business versus, like the sustainability of it and or trying to help people? Like, is there ever a bit of a sort of a wrestling match there internally?
Every day. I mean, I think that this is a project that I couldn't have done before today in my life. I didn't have the wisdom. I might have had the power, but not the wisdom. I mean, the agreement that I have with myself and with the company in general is to make sure that every decision that I make is about sustainability of the company and reinvesting in the company. It's why I have put all of my assets into the parent company, which is the company that has funded EI Ventures for the last 10 years. EI Ventures technically is less than a 2-year-old company, but it is something that I've probably been working on since 2008. So again, it comes down to the idea of the way we've stewarded this project and how we always say how you do anything is how you do everything. And my commitment is to not have a liquidity event for myself, but to reinvest that money back into the company. and I've stayed very true to that, have had a lot of propositions to sell the company or, liquefy myself, but I'm all in. And I see, on my dying day, I will still be involved in EI Ventures.
That's great. So on the structure, so what is it? Orthogonal Thinker is the sort of parent company, and you have EI Ventures and a couple other sort of holdings underneath?
Yeah. Orthogonal Thinker as a whole is a holding company that has minority investments and are wholly owned subsidiaries. So one of the wholly owned subsidiaries is EI Ventures. As of about a month or two ago, EI Ventures for the first time had raised money outside of Orthogonal Thinker. So Orthogonal Thinker has probably put almost $2 million into EI Ventures on what I would say, formal accounting basis. I would say there's been millions of dollars personally between myself, my personal funds, as well as Orthogonal Thinker in the last 10 years to create what is EI Ventures today. And EI Ventures it stands for Emotional Intelligence Ventures. It's a company that holds intellectual property in over 70 botanical compounds.
So if I want to step back and kind of stay on that EI Ventures, actually before I go there, so as part of Orthogonal, like your background is much more sort of tech laden previous, and I think there's an affiliation with Y Combinator, and then there's Betterment, Airbnb, and a bunch of others. So those would fit under Orthogonal, and then
That's correct. That is correct. So my background is been an entrepreneur since a young age, was in the nightlife and technology and real estate industry, sort of dabbled in everything, probably invested in over 100 things in the last 20 years, and moved to Hawaii over a decade ago to, as corny as this sounds, is work on my own emotional intelligence. And somewhere or another, this product Silly came into my field, and somewhere or another, it convinced me to put everything I have into this project. I mean, a lot of people ask me why I did this. I did this because it's so easy to come up with conditional statements and make excuses. And I wanted to make sure that, when I did this, I ultimately was accountable at the highest degree possible. So whatever happens with EI Ventures, I am ultimately responsible, and my personal assets are responsible.
Put your money where your mouth is.
Yeah, totally.
I had someone I'm close to, and they say there's 3 conversations. There's the me to me, which is you convincing yourself or, being in agreement with yourself that whatever you're doing or selling is right. There's the me to you, which is now me convincing you. And then there's the you to you, which is you convincing you that it's the right thing. So it feels like the me to me is there. The me to you is certainly 50% there or more. And then the you to you, which is, people believing in it is coming and will continue to come. So it's interesting. So if I wanted to invest in this sort of asset class today, how would I go about doing it?
What I would tell you is and people ask me this question almost every day, I would go out and I do a lot of research, and I would really find the company that really speaks to you. And again, it depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking to make money, there's a ton of ways to make money in the psychedelic space in the short term. But if you're a longitudinal investor, which is the way I look at things, most of the holdings that I have are usually over a decade old. I would really do your due diligence and get to know the people behind the company, and look at good public information of, who's running these organizations, who owns them, and, what do you want to be a part of long term?
That's a tricky thing, for many people to do, I guess, to decipher that. But that's the whole point of research, I guess.
Money is a frequency of energy, and I don't want to look at the political landscape of today, but, we've ultimately created where we are today. So I think there's an understanding of reading the labels and actually reading the fine print. It's easy to say yes, but being discerning is something totally different.
Is there anything in your view that you kind of want to hit on particularly that you don't think we've covered?
No, I mean, I got to tell you, this is probably one of the best interviews or conversations I have. I think that, anybody thinking about this space or wanting to get involved or investing, I go back to a lot of the formulators and people that ended up going down this road, whether it was, Alexander Shulgin or our formulator, which has been working on this for many, many decades, is the idea of these products were not for party drugs. They were about establishing empathy. And, I heard this once and it really resonated with me. Empathy is about viewing things out of other people's lenses. And as, again, people sometimes say, David, you get corny with this stuff. But I really think in today's society and where we are and everything that's happened in the US with, I can't even believe what has happened in the last couple of weeks, but we need empathy for one another. And, the fact that, we can't come to Canada and, traveling is difficult and everything that's going on is we just got to be nicer to one another. We got to have empathy for each other. And that's why I'm in psychedelics. So have empathy for your fellow neighbor, have empathy for, the people around the world. We're all going through something.
I like that. You know what? I feel like people that would be most critical are probably people that haven't explored it would be my first inclination there. And that's great advice. Really good advice. Hopefully people got to know you a little bit on the podcast today when you think, when you're talking about do research, understand the people behind, the various companies if you're looking to invest in this space for whatever reason. But yeah, I think you're, a very candid, open person and certainly hope and think you will be successful. So, it's been a great conversation. The one closer that is offbeat and random that I always like to ask people, not to put too much pressure on it, which I always seem to do, is if you were to pick one song to sing karaoke to, on or off psychedelics, I guess, what would it be?
Oh gosh. I mean, it's definitely, this is where my Asperger's is going to get the best of me. But, I think a lot about, people in the 60s. I'd probably say it's probably something from the Beatles or something from that. There's one song that talks about we're all a piece of small carbon dust. And I'm probably getting this totally wrong, but yeah, I think when I think about all this, I resonate with the songs that talk about love. And I was just in the Caribbean. A lot of people were playing a lot of Bob Marley and, One Love.
There you go.
We all bleed the same. So I'll go with that. One Love.
I love it. That's awesome. Listen, I really appreciate your time. I think people will learn a lot. Orthogonal thinker, Al Ventures, emotional intelligence. They can find you online and track your progress. Hopefully we stay in touch, and it's been a pleasure. So thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, very, very grateful. Aloha, my friend.
Take care.
Your time is valuable. So thanks for joining us for this episode of Venture and Gains, where we connect great people, ideas, and opportunities. It's this idea of net weaving versus networking. Stay healthy.
Darcy McConvey is a director of private capital markets at Greybrook Realty Partners and is registered under Greybrook Securities, Inc. The opinions and statements expressed by Darcy and the Venture and Gains guests are their own, and they do not reflect the opinions of Greybrook Realty Partners or Greybrook Securities. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.